We left off Sunday with Revelation 3 and verse 9, and we had discussed verse 9, but I mentioned something about the Jews there in both Philadelphia and Sardis, I think, where we are now. And the Jews, Jesus called a synagogue of Satan. And, of course, the reason he did that is because they had set themselves in opposition against Christ Jesus and against all that he stood for and persecuting the church. And I mentioned that the Jews there showed great zeal in persecuting the Christians. And I looked for this information that I had on Polycarp's death and couldn't find it, but I found it today, and I would like to just read this. This is from the book called The Martyrdom, which speaks of Polycarp's death, and of course it was written after his death. I forget who it was that wrote it, but I'd like to read this excerpt from it and then an excerpt from another one. It says, Polycarp is recorded as saying on the day of his death, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. Now this could indicate that he was then 86 years old, or that he may have lived 86 years after his conversion. We don't know which is the case because it's a little ambiguous. But the statement that he said, 86 years I have served him, would seem to indicate that he had been a Christian for that long. And he says, and he has done me no wrong. So Polycarp goes on to say, how then can I blaspheme my King and Savior? Bring forth what thou wilt. And this is Polycarp talking to his tormentors. Do what you want to with me. Well, he was burned at the stake for refusing to burn incense to the Roman emperor. Now, there are some things associated with his death that people attribute that certainly didn't happen. One is that the fire wasn't burning, and of course that has been exaggerated because he is held in such high esteem, and he was one of the very early Christian martyrs under the Roman Empire, under the Roman persecutions. Now, in another book I found, and I have references to these. If you're interested, this page will be up here and you can see the references. You can pull them up yourself and read them. But this is about the role that Jews played in persecuting Christians, and specifically in Polycarp's martyrdom. And this stirring role is given to the Jews in bringing about Polycarp's death is further evidenced by how the author of the martyrdom describes the preparations for the burning of Polycarp. They said, these things then happened with great speed, quicker than words can tell. The crowds forthwith collecting from the workshops and baths, timber and faggots, and the Jews more especially assisting in this with zeal, as was their wont. In other words, this was their custom. And the Jews were, of course, we know they dogged the Apostle Paul's footsteps in the second and third missionary journeys. In fact, after he preached in Antioch of Pisidia and Lystra and Derbe and Iconium, and he was stoned there. And the Jews followed him wherever he went, and he was run out of Berea, run out of Thessalonica, had to go to Athens, laughed out of Athens. And so he had problem with the Jews opposing Christianity. And so this comment on this says, we can see in the above passage that the Jews are being described as having a fanatical hatred of Polycarp as an individual, and as such are desperate to see him out of this world as quickly as humanly possible. They do this by ransacking the nearby workshops and bath complexes of Smyrna to acquire as much combustible materials as they possibly can so they can make Polycarp's life his live public cremation come all the faster. And this is documented history, and we have evidences of this in the Roman Empire. And we'll see a lot more of these evidences, especially in Part 2, because in Part 2 we deal more specifically with the persecutions against the Christians. But I wanted to bring that to your attention on verse 9. Any comment on verse 9? Okay, let's go ahead then to verse 10. Because thou didst keep the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of trial, that hour which is to come upon the whole earth, to try them that dwell upon the earth. So this speaks specifically of an hour of trial that is coming upon the Christians. And we see here that Jesus promises here to keep them from this hour of trial. So he's going to do something to cause these Christians to be exempt from it. And we don't know how God does this. He does it in his providence some way. But some are persecuted more heavily than others, and it seems to be dependent upon what they have done for Christ, because he says here, because thou didst keep the word of my patience, I also will keep thee from the hour of trial. So this is payback. And this is God's way of doing it. He's going to bless those who have been faithful to him, and those who haven't been faithful to him are going to suffer greater consequences. And we see that here. Now this hour, which was to come upon the whole world, was coming for the purpose to try them that dwell upon the earth. Now this word earth in the Greek is the Greek word gay, G-A, and it's pronounced gay. And this word is used some 82 times in Revelation. I think it must be on, yeah, here it is on the second page. It's used 82 times in the book of Revelation, and most of the time it refers to the world of the ungodly, the unregenerate. Just like so many times in the scriptures, the word world is used as standing in opposition to God. Like, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that's in the world, the lust of the eye, the lust of the pride of life, and so forth, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And he that makes himself a friend of the world is what with God? He's an enemy of God. So most of the time this word gay is used referring to the unregenerate people, people who are not Christians. But here it seems to be used literally, because he's talking about the fact that both the Christians and the non-Christians are going to be put to the test. And we might wonder, well, how is it that the non-Christians can suffer from this hour of trial that's coming upon the earth? And I think we need to understand that when Christians were persecuted and martyred like this, that a lot of times non-Christians felt sorry for them. In fact, we have documented cases where non-Christians were converted because of the sufferings that they saw the Christians going through. They felt sorry for the Christians. They knew that the Christians were good people. They did not deserve these horrendous persecutions that they were undergoing, because they were put to death every conceivable way. They were fed to wild beasts. they were burned, they were drowned, they were put in sacks and tied up and let wild dogs eat them, just every way that they could be thought of to put them to death. And people watched this. I mean, it was like a gladiatorial show. They saw this, and they did this in public. And this is what eventually turned the Roman population against them, so that in 313 AD, Constantine signed the Edict of Toleration and legalized Christianity, because the general population turned against it. And so we can see that Jesus says here, that hour which is to come upon the whole world is to try them that dwell upon the earth. And I think here he means both Christian and non-Christian. They'll both groups will be put to the test. Of course, the Christians will be put to the test because they will be given an opportunity to deny Christ and live. Or those who are non-Christians will be put to the test because their conscience will bother them to such an extent that they will start feeling sorry for the Christians and may even become converted. So I think this is the way both groups can be put to the test, by the same thing. Any comment on that? All right. Does any comment or question on 3:10 before we leave verse 10? All right, let's look then at verse 11. Jesus says, I come quickly. Hold fast that which thou hast, that no one take thy crown. Now, his coming here may have been a physical coming in judgment, which I think probably it was, or, of course, we know that he's going to come quickly when he comes for the second time. He's going to come like a thief in the night. No one's going to expect it, and it will be sudden. At the sound of the last trump, he will be revealed from heaven in flaming fire with his holy angels, taking vengeance on the people that don't know God and that obey not the gospel. This is going to be one of his last coming. But here I think he's talking about he will come quickly in judgment upon these people who are persecuting the Christians. And this shows the Christians that Jesus is aware of their plight and he can do something about it. His being knowledgeable of what they're undergoing would be a source of great comfort to them, because they would know that he has the power to do something about the persecutions that they are undergoing. And this is the fifth time Jesus has spoken of his coming in chapter 2, verse 5, 16, and 25, and in chapter 3, verses 3 and 11. So he's assuring these persecuted Christians that he will come quickly in judgment. And I think this is a coming in judgment upon his enemies. And he exhorts them to hold fast to what they have. Hold fast to that which thou hast. And we made the comment in Thyatira that he said the same thing, that he's not asking them to grow, he's asking them to maintain their faith, to hold on to what they've got. In other words, don't turn loose of it. Don't become unfaithful, but hold on to what you have. And in the face of the persecutions that they were encountering, this was a great feat to hold on to what they had, because every day they were coming into situations in which they were being put to the test to deny Christ. And so if they would maintain that faith in the face of these things, then they would be doing what Jesus is encouraging them to do here. So these Christians here at Smyrna had no, or Sardis had no reproofs at all. Or at Philadelphia. Philadelphia and Smyrna are the only two congregations in which there were no reproofs, nothing wrong with them. So keeping their crown was contingent upon them holding on to what they had, holding fast. And Brother Harold made this comment last Sunday that this indicates that once saved, always saved is not true. Because what would happen to them if they failed to hold on to what they had? They'd lose their crown. They'd be lost. Well, certainly, if they held on to what they had, they would continue to be saved. But if they did not hold on to what they had, they would be lost. So this shows us that once saved, always saved is not true. It's false doctrine. It sounds good. And it's something that, you know, it would be a great comfort to me to believe. I remember my grandfather, my mother's dad, devout Baptist. And I remember when I was a kid, I remember him saying that even if he were committing fornication with one of his daughters and Jesus came back, he'd be saved. And I was just a kid when I heard that. I couldn't believe. But he believed, once saved, always saved. Well, if you believe that doctrine, once you're saved, you can do anything you want to do. What incentive do you have to live a godly life? You don't have any. So certainly that the devil has got a lot of people deceived into believing that. And I love my granddad. He was otherwise he was a good man, but he had that false doctrine, and he would not listen to Bible studies. I mean, in fact, he told my dad to, if he's going to mention that anymore, for him not to even come to his house. And I really felt bad about that because I was just a young kid, but it made a strong impression on me. Any comment on verse 11? All right, look at verse 12. Again, he that overcometh, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out thence no more. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and mine own new name. So Jesus promises something here to the overcomer. And this is the sixth time he has made the overcomer a promise. This is the sixth church that he's addressing. And in all six of them, he promises the overcomer something. Here, Jesus makes 4 promises to the overcomer. Any member of Christ's church who overcomes is saved. Even the overcomer at Laodicea is promised heaven in 3 verse 21. When we get down there, we'll see that. So Jesus promises here the overcomer 4 things. The first one is he will make him a pillar in the temple of his God. Now, a pillar is something that supports weight. Like this room is resting on weight-bearing walls and on pillars. That's a pillar right there in the middle of the room. Why is that pillar there? What would happen if it wasn't there? It'd probably cave in. So that pillar is there to give stability. Well, here in these towns, they were just ravaged with earthquakes, just earthquake after earthquake. And there were so many earthquakes here that the people often slept outside because they were afraid to be in their homes in case an earthquake came and the home caved in on them. So they'd sleep out in the field, sleep out in the open. Well, here Jesus is promising these people, I'll make you a pillar in the temple of my God. Now, normally, after a real strong storm or earthquake or something like that, you can see these pillars are still standing because of the way they're constructed. They're so stable and their strength and so forth. And this must have been a great source of comfort to these people to know that in the temple of his God they would be made a pillar so that they would not have to go out of their homes anymore because of the fear of earthquakes. I can't imagine living in a place that I'd be afraid to sleep in the house. It'd be better sleeping out in the field. But this is the way it was in this time. Another thing Jesus promises, he will write on him the name of his God. Now, what that is telling the overcomer is that I'm going to put my Father's name on you, and you will belong to him. You are his. Well, don't you know that this would be a source of comfort for them to know that they belong to God? I feel good in knowing that God is my Father, don't you? That I am his child. It gives me a sense of security to know that he's my Father, because I know that if he is my Father, he's going to take care of me. He's going to watch over me. He's going to provide for me. And that's what Jesus is telling him here. I'm going to write my God's name on you. Not only that, I'm going to write the name of the city of God, New Jerusalem, on you. Now, when John wrote this, old Jerusalem had been destroyed about 20 years ago. This is about 95, and old Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. So here's about 25 years later, and New Jerusalem's name is going to be written on them, indicating that this is the heavenly home, that they're going to be citizens of that heavenly home, not the old earthly Jerusalem, but they're going to be citizens of God's heavenly city, New Jerusalem. And of course, that citizenship would give them all the rights that citizens have. It would be terrible to be in heaven and not be a citizen of it and not able to enjoy all the benefits that are there to enjoy. But by our being citizens of heaven, then all the joys that are there to be enjoyed will be accessible to us. And he says, I will write Jesus' own new name here. Now, I think what this is symbolic of is that once Jesus finished his work here on this earth, once he was finished with it, he earned the new name given to him. God says, this day, thou art my beloved Son, this day have I begotten thee. And that was said of him after his resurrection. After Jesus did all of the work that he did, it was this day that Jesus had done everything that made him what God wanted him to be. There was nothing left for Jesus to do. He had done everything God wanted him to do, therefore he was qualified to do everything that God wanted him to do. Remember in the Hebrew letter it says, though he were a son, talking about when he was on earth, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience. How? Through the things which he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation to all them that obey him. Now, how was it that Jesus was made perfect? Was he not perfect before? Was he not perfect before he came to this earth? Yes, he was. Was he not perfect while he was here? Yes, he was. But he was not perfect in the sense that he was all that God wanted him to be. He became all that God wanted him to be through the things which he suffered, and then being made perfect. In other words, he learned obedience through this thing. And this is the way Jesus became what God wanted him to be. And in doing this, he got this new name. He never had this name before. But he says, not only do I have it, but I'm going to write it on the overcomer. I'm going to write that name on him. Brother Harold?
Would that name be Christian?
I think we don't know, I don't know what it is, Brother Harold, because I don't know if the scriptures reveal all that Jesus has attained now as he sits at God's right hand. I know that the scriptures reveal that he rules all things and that all authority has been given unto him, but what does that entail? I don't really know.
Well, it says, I'll write on him that overcome the name of my God. I wonder if that might be like our name would be Christian.
Well, the name of his God, again, that just shows that God owns us as our ownership because his name is on us. But he's also got Jesus' own new name.
Yeah, that might be different.
Yeah, this word new, the Greeks had two words for new. One of them was new in time, and another was new in kind. This word is new in kind. In other words, it had never existed before. It was a new name that had never been used before. But it's the name that Jesus acquired after he finished his work here on this earth. And it's a deep thought, but to me it's a comforting thought because it lets me know that we are in for blessings that we don't know anything about. There's no telling what heaven's going to be. There's just no way of knowing. But we do know that one day we will know what it is. We'll understand it. But here in this life, we don't have the ability to understand it. And I think that's what this is symbolic of. Any comment on verse 12? Okay, and then he says, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. Again, the one who has an ear is exhorted to hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Each individual Christian is responsible to know what God tells all the churches because each of us have ears. And if we have ears, God expects us to hear. Hear what? What the Spirit says to the churches. So that's why we should read and study God's Word in order that we might know what it is that is said to the churches. There's not one doctrine taught at one church and another doctrine taught at another church. The same doctrine should be taught in every church. The Apostle Paul in Acts 20 and verse 27 said that he declared the whole counsel of God to the church at Ephesus. And then he said at 1 Corinthians 4:17 that Timothy will put you in remembrance of my ways in the Lord, that things that I teach everywhere in every church. So he taught the same thing in all the churches. And that's the way it ought to be. Now certainly there are times when a preacher will emphasize things more in one church than he does another, because there may be a need for that. And if we are to reprove, rebuke, exhort with long suffering, then a preacher, an evangelist, has got to know what the congregation needs, or he won't be able to reprove them and rebuke them and exhort them. So certainly some things will be preached more in one church than another. I heard one time, you may have heard this, the crowd going out the door shaking hands with the preacher, and this guy come by and he says, how long are you going to preach this? He says, I've heard this over and over again. He says, well, I'm going to preach it until you start doing it. and that's the way it ought to be. So, any comment there on verse 13? All right, to the angel of the church in Laodicea, right. Now, this is the last church. What, we got about 2 minutes?
2, 3.
Now, let's stop here because we'll start with Laodicea, and that way we'll have. This is the longest letter to any of the 7 churches, and it'll probably take about all of Sunday morning to get through this. And once we get through it, we'll look at the pictures on Laodicea. Any final comment before we close tonight? Well, thank you so much for your participation in class.